All right, class. May this little ladybug in the middle of the screen speak to us today a little bit about the Four Noble Truths and the sacred text and what you're supposed to take away, how you're supposed to prepare for the sacred text questions for the Buddhism test. Now, one of the things you might find of interest, if you go back to the readings that start on page 395, the selection of sacred text readings, is that you get a nice progression of what our authors thought would give you an overview of Buddhist sacred text. So how does sacred text work in this tradition where one is always trying to reach the point of understanding the human relationship to an ever-changing world? That's not such a crazy idea, right? That this is a tradition that wants to get to the heart of the human relationship to an ever-changing world. And so we hear in the first one that the Majjhima Nikaya, that he is counseling one of his perhaps zealous students and saying, listen, I used to live on one piece of rice and one bean a day. But that's not the way, that's not the middle way. That kind of asceticism does not bring you to enlightenment. This is not pure suffering. And the reason I want to bring that up is that when you hear life is suffering, especially in our modern pleasure, entertainment-based world, it's likely to think, well, that's no fun. The Buddha was not about no fun. He was not about no pleasure. What he was about is understanding the human relationship to the changeability of existence. So, first reading is telling a young student severe asceticism is not what we're up to. The second reading tells you about how orificey and oozy and impermanent the human body is. So there does seem to be a kind of sense of, man, this stuff is just not what we should be. Because of when we live now, I think about us in plastic surgery, right? Like the idea that if I could just make it perfect, I would be happy. And this is just, that's not their picture of what will make you happy. So that second reading tells you all about how many bones and tendons and there's snot coming out of your nose, there's wax coming out of your ears. This is just not the place, the body's not the place where happiness is going to come. So then we get into the Four Noble Truths. And specifically, all the questions are going to deal with is the first noble truth, but in its relationship to the other truths. So on page 399, 398, now monks, what is the noble truth of suffering? Just this. Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Involvement with what is unpleasant is suffering. Separation from what is pleasant is suffering. Also, not getting what one wants and strives for is suffering. Now, and this is the part I want you to get to. And form is suffering. What does he mean by form? Form is the mind's propensity to take in perception and give it a name, give it a shape, give it a meaning. Form self would qualify as a form, right? That is the mind misunderstanding this little package and thinking maybe it is an eternal Atman, right? He comes up right up against that, his Hindu training, and he says, I haven't found a permanent thing in here yet. I breathe and I'm a different being because now I have different oxygen, I have different molecules. My mind changes when I'm hungry. My memories change over time. I am not Atman, I am Anatman. Form is suffering because as soon as you are making the I statements, I don't do this, I don't like that, you've given form, you've created illusions of permanence where he is saying the real peace, beauty, love is going to happen when you appreciate everything for its impermanence. So form is suffering because form is the mind making a mistake out of Maya, out of the illusion. That, right? So he's coming out of that Hinduism, and he'll grant its illusion, but he doesn't think that there's an eternal permanence that we could just get past. He thinks that all the work of form and of creating illusion is pretty much happening in consciousness. So here's the first philosopher of consciousness who says 99% of your experience is a fabrication behind your own eyeballs. You are making form out of a world of change. And you're getting stuck on stuff, and when you get stuck on it, when you think that there is a self who's now hurt, whose feelings are hurt, those kinds of things, then you are living in suffering. And the way out of that suffering, then, is to not attach onto form. So form is suffering, feeling is suffering, perception is suffering, karmic constituents are suffering, consciousness is suffering. These 5 things, these 5 agglomerations, these are the skandhas. So form is our mind's attachment with word and idea to an ever-changing world. Feeling is suffering. Your feelings change. I love you, I love you, I love you. Right? Feelings. If you attach to feeling the idea that it will be permanent, that will bring you suffering. Perception is suffering. I'm cold, I'm hot, all of these ways that we take in information, this is our mind putting together what is nothing but an ever-changing world of dynamic energy. So perception is suffering to the extent that I don't like this, she doesn't like me, any of those perceptions that we attach with the illusion that they are permanent or that we have a self that has been hurt by these things. Karmic constituents are suffering. What did you arrive in this world with? Did you arrive with the optimism? Did you arrive with pessimism? What kinds of reverberations from your previous life are part of your koan, your central paradox that guides your life? So those karmic constituents are in this idea of samsara. You're going to arrive with some baggage that you've got to work through. These are the 5 agglomerations, and then consciousness. Because consciousness, if any of you live with a committee in your head that's telling you what you've done wrong, what everybody else has done wrong, and won't let you go to sleep at night, you'll know that consciousness is suffering. If you think about mental illness and its relationship to gun violence in American culture right now, you can say, yes, consciousness is suffering. Because when the consciousness is creating and fabricating a psychosis, and it latches on to the fantasy of that gun, and it kills pigs or whatever it's seeing out there, consciousness then is the source of suffering. So that's the noble truth of suffering. So then the second, about what is the origin of all of that suffering, he says, every bit of that is initiated by desire. And a desire for attachment, a desire for permanence. If you're going to grow old and die, and that makes you sad, it means that you're desiring something that can't be permanent, which would be your eternal youth. So desire will be the root, he says, if you follow back on anything from which you're experiencing suffering, that you will find that desire for it to be otherwise. And so that's why you have to cease desires that would lead you to attachment. And that's why you need, and that is such hard work, that our consciousness is so integrated in our body, and it has such complex layers. A storehouse unconsciousness is what Buddhism calls it. Contemporary psychology might call that the unconscious. That there are deep layers of primitive brain that we don't even hardly realize. It takes a lot of work to become a witness to the movements of consciousness in order to simply witness to them rather than be a victim to them. So that's the piece I really want to get at, that with the questions about the noble truth of suffering, you need to understand what form is. That form is that fabrication in the mind of an idea or a word or something that you think from the word, from like betrayal. What is betrayal? Betrayal is a form. It is a self-constructing, there should have been loyalty and there wasn't. Well, as long as you're there and you desire a world of loyalty, you will experience suffering because people will betray you. So if you can get rid, you have to take these steps back. What I hope you'll leave Buddhism with is not the idea that these are the no fun people, but rather that you will hear in the phrase, old age is suffering, perceptions are suffering. When you hear that, you will hear somebody who's not saying the world is all bad, retreat and go away. Rather, you will hear somebody saying, we have 99% of the work in seeing the world to be done through our own cleaning out of the way desire will have us chasing after Maya, chasing after illusions. And so it's really a very complex psychology that nevertheless says, unless you're using that body, unless you're using breath, unless you're using meditation, unless you're using concentration, unless you're living by the precepts that do not bring you to the muckety muck of real suffering, then you can have a life of a kind of bliss that has to do with seeing impermanence, understanding impermanence, and living in an impermanent body with other impermanent bodies in an impermanent natural world with the wisdom that leads to you being compassionate and helpful. So it's not a pessimistic tradition, but it fears that humans chase after the wrong things so many times that unless you do the work to clear the consciousness, to understand what is the case of yourself as well as your world, you will perpetuate suffering. All right, I wish you the best of luck on the big test, and hope this has been an interesting one for, as I said at the beginning, probably the most countercultural tradition that we will see. And because there's nothing like finding your passion, expressing yourself, finding your voice, all the kinds of things of our culture. And this is a very countercultural message to that suggests, no, leading towards self. Anything that's leading towards a notion of self is leading to suffering. So I hope you get away on that as you make your way through it all. Thanks. Check for updates. Bye.